When commitment prevents you from being happy, commitment can sabotage your chance at happiness when it is invasive and prevents your desires from being fulfilled. Whether we like it or not, and most of the time we don't, we are all subject to certain obligations, pretty much from the time we are born. Learning to respond to commitment is part of normal and healthy growth. But if you take it to extremes, it ends up blocking your ability to be happy. Obligation is a factor that helps to establish and develop the reality principle. This is the awareness of the limits that your desires have, depending on the guidelines and requirements that your environment imposes. At some point, everyone has to give up doing what they want because they have to follow a different path. In some cases, living up to our commitments becomes extremely invasive. Doing this leads to situations where one's desires end up being inhibited, often to an extreme degree, and one's only obligation is to function. When this happens, you also give up the possibility of being happy. If nothing is self-evident, nothing can be proven. In the same way, nothing is obligatory for its own sake. Nothing is obligatory at all. C.S. Lewis. Commitment as a guideline for behavior. As humans, we have a natural tendency to follow our desires, or in other words, to do what we want. An important part of a child's upbringing consists in introducing the concept of obligation or duty into their consciousness. They have e.g. want to eat a whole box of sweets, but they have to limit themselves. Or they want to hit another child because he or she took a toy from them, but they shouldn't. To be part of the human community, one must renounce many of one's desires to follow the path of obligation. However, your upbringing or certain life experiences may lead you to adapt obligations that are not necessary for living in a civilized society. In reality, you are reacting to ideas or beliefs that are not always valid. If you end up living your life based on obligations, you actually come to see your own desires as intrusive or negative. Consequently, you suppress or deny them. You prefer perhaps not taking a vacation because you believe it is far more useful and productive to continue working all year round. Obligation as an obstacle. If you live your life governed by obligation, you are likely to be extremely demanding of yourself. It is not so much that you have to do things perfectly, but you feel that you have to fully respond to the demands made by the authorities or the established norms of society. You do not judge the convenience or validity of these demands, but simply have a deep desire to fulfill them. Your coordinates for duties are determined by others, and your desire is to conform to them. Leaving these parameters causes concern, if not anxiety, in you. In fact, what you really want has no place in your life. You just want to comply with the duties imposed on you to avoid any anxiety. Consequently, your obligations become obstacles to your happiness. If, on the other hand, you chose the duty in a sensible and independent way, however difficult it might be, it would coincide with what you want and it would not conflict with your happiness. Like a person who commits to a cause that requires sacrifice, but who deep down does what he or she wants. On the other hand, when an obligation is imposed from the outside, you do not reaffirm yourself. On the contrary, one denies oneself and fulfills one's duty not to contradict the relevant figure or authority norm. The commitment to be happy. Should one completely forget duty in favor of desire or pleasure? The answer is no. If you only do what you feel like doing, you don't have the reference point of commitment to create a contrast, and consequently you don't feel satisfied. The same applies in the opposite case. Acting solely according to obligation is like inflicting systematic torture on oneself. If you live your life guided by your obligations, you are not an exemplary person, but simply an extremely conditioned person. The basis of your actions, does not lie in freedom or autonomy, but in a directive and possibly in the fear of contradicting it. For the same reason, you make duty automatic and not an expression of your being. Ideally, you should maintain a balance between duty and desire. One gives meaning to the other. In fact, it makes it possible to create the contrast that causes spontaneous feelings of effort and satisfaction to flow. In conclusion, it is worth remembering that fulfilling your duties is commendable as long as it does not sabotage your own happiness.